Whew, I'm tired. I just got back from a 1 million millimeter walk. Yeah, that's how far I walked today. All right, guys. Today we're going to talk about converting between centimeters and millimeters. Our goal for the day is I can convert. I can convert between centimeters and millimeters. Before we dive into this lesson, I'm going to throw a word at you probably haven't heard before. Maybe you have, but regardless, I'm just going to define it for you. So the word is diameter. And a diameter is a straight line that connects opposite sides of a circle through the center. So, of course, when we're learning a new word, I always like to tell you what it is, but I'll also tell you what it is not. All right. So it's a straight line connecting opposite sides of a circle. So here's one side of a circle here, and here's the opposite side of the circle. All right. Now, in the definition, it says it has to be a straight line. So this is not a diameter if I do something like that. Even though it does connect opposite sides of the circle and it does pass through the center of the circle, it's not a straight line. So therefore, it's not a diameter. Okay. So that's the first thing that it is not. The second thing is it has to connect opposite sides of the circle. Okay, so if we put a dot right here and a dot right here, those are not opposite sides of a circle. Okay, so the opposite side from this point here would be a point over here on the opposite side of the circle. And then if we drew a straight line from that side to that side, forgive me, man, really tough to draw straight lines here. Okay, but let's pretend that that line is straight. It goes from opposite ends of the circle and it passes through the center. If it meets those two criteria, then it is a diameter, and that's going to be important a little bit later on. In fact, on the next slide here. So the problem I wanted to work through with you today, it looks like this. All right, so it says, what is the diameter of a loonie? Okay, so in order to answer this question, we're going to need to be able to take our loonie and we have to put it over here on our ruler. And of course, we want to double check and make sure we're using the metric side of our ruler, the side with centimeters and millimeters, and not the inches side down here, the imperial side. Okay. Now, I was just working with my 5-year-old son on measuring the other day, and he did something that I'm wondering maybe some of you in grade 5 might still be making this same mistake. And so I asked him to take a ruler and to measure something. And what he did is he took the item that I asked him to measure and he put it right at the end of his ruler, like that. And then he read the number on the ruler and he told me that it was like 1.5 centimeters long. Now, the problem with that is that you'll notice that the scale on the ruler doesn't actually start at the end of the ruler. It starts right here where there's this big tick that says 0. So he understood the concept of using a ruler, except that he didn't align the start of what he was measuring with the 0. He aligned it with the edge. So make sure when you're measuring something that you don't make that same mistake. So what we want to do is we want to just plop this loonie down right about there, and we'll just shift it over so that the edge of that is right on the 0. Might take a little bit of finessing here. Yeah, just like that. And then if I click off the loonie, we can see the edge of the loonie lines up right with that line there. Okay, and then what we want to do is kind of make a mental note of where that loonie comes to, how far down the ruler it comes. And I'm just, to make things a little easier on us here, I'm going to just put a little red arrow right there. All right, so you can see that the edge of the loonie comes there. And then what we can do is we can remove the loonie so we can actually see the scale, the millimeters underneath it here, and that'll make our job a little bit easier. Okay, so here we go. Let's move that loonie up and off the scale. We'll keep that red mark there. And so down here on the bottom here, you'll see that I'm asking us to measure that in millimeters, and I'm also asking us to measure that in centimeters. We'll get to the centimeters in a second here. But for millimeters, remember each one of these little ticks, so in between the 0 and the 1, there are 10 little ticks here, and each one of those little ticks represents 1 millimeter. So if we were to count it up, rather than counting up by ones, I'm just going to be more efficient here. And we're going to say that from 0 to 1, that's 10. And then there's 10 more here, so that would be 20. And then we got 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 millimeters right there. Okay, so that's my answer. Turns out a loonie is roughly 25 millimeters in diameter. Okay, but on the right-hand side, it's asking us to measure the same loonie in centimeters. So rather than looking at the little tiny ticks in between here, what we're doing is we're looking at the bigger, the long ticks here. So 0, 1, 2. And it turns out that a loonie is 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, and then it goes halfway up to the third centimeter, but it isn't quite 3 centimeters. So we would call this 2.5 or 2.5 centimeters. So we'll plunk that answer in on the right-hand side of the page here as well. There it is, 2.5 centimeters. And so we are measuring the same object here. We measured a loonie in millimeters and we measured a loonie in centimeters. And it turns out that 25 millimeters is the exact same as 2.5 centimeters, all right? So that's just a little example where we can use two different units to measure the same object and it'll give us two different answers there, okay? Now, in yesterday's lesson, I mentioned that the metric system is really easy to use. We can convert between millimeters and centimeters quite easily because everything just increases by a factor of 10. So if you watched the video yesterday, you may recognize this chart. And today, we're just going to focus in on a very small portion of this chart here, okay? We're going to focus in on just this part that I've got outlined in red, and that's converting between centimeters and millimeters. And it is just a factor of 10. There are 10 millimeters in a centimeter. That means that if we want to convert between centimeters and millimeters, all we're doing is multiplying by 10 or dividing by 10 to get that answer. Now, I want to just show you a little life hack that if you learn this early on, it's going to make math quite a bit easier for you for the rest of your schooling, all right? So this is multiplying and dividing by 10, a life hack. So make sure you're paying attention here. Some people would call this cheating. I would call this being efficient with math, okay? So here's the two rules. When you multiply by 10, or when you multiply a number by 10, move the decimal to the right by one place value. Okay. When you divide a number by 10, you move the decimal to the left by one place value. And if you don't know what that means, let me just show you. We'll go back to our old friend, the place value chart, which we talked about earlier in the year. So I'm going to just write a number. Let's start with like 19. So we're going to put a 1 in the tens place value. We'll put a 9 in the ones place value. And that there makes a value of 19, okay? And if I want to multiply that number by 10, so let's say 19 times 10 over here, the little life hack that I just taught you up here is that when you multiply by 10, you move the decimal to the right by one place value. So here's our decimal point right here. We don't write it, like if I was just to write the number 19, I wouldn't write a decimal after it, but there's an imaginary or an invisible one after it. And what this is telling me to do is if I'm multiplying 19 by 10, I'm just gonna take this decimal, I'm gonna move it over one place value. So we're gonna plunk it down right here. One place value to the right, okay? And that leaves us with an empty place value here, all right? And anytime you have an empty place value, you simply fill it up with a 0 because we don't like empty place values, all right? And that's your answer. So to multiply 19 by 10, we're just gonna move the decimal over to the right one and fill up that empty place value with a 0, and our answer is 190. All right, now let's just try going the opposite way because I also said if you're dividing a number by 10, you can move the decimal to the left by one place value. So let's do our same number here. Let's start with 19. And if I want to divide 19 by 10, so let's just go over here and write divide by 10. Like that. We start with our decimal right here after the 9, but in this case, we're actually going to move it to the left by one place value, and that's going to put it right in between my 1 and my 9, okay? So it turns out that 19 divided by 10 would actually equal 1.9. Okay, so that's just a really, really useful skill for multiplying and dividing by 10. It'll save you from having to whip out a calculator or do long division. Heaven forbid you should have to do that. Okay, so let's then move on to an example here. Okay, a few examples. So I've got this chart off to the right here just to help us out again. And this first example, they give us 45 millimeters and they ask us to convert that number to centimeters. All right, so here's how we use this chart. We start with millimeters, which is all the way over here on the right-hand side, and they want us to convert it to centimeters. And so the key for doing that is to divide our amount of millimeters by 10. So 45 divided by 10. And what I just taught you on the previous slide there is that we can just take our decimal place here, which would be after the 5, and we can move it to the left one place value. So that would plunk it right in between the 4 and the 5. So the answer there would be 4.5 centimeters. Okay. Now, going the other way, if we start with 27 centimeters, starting with centimeters, and they want us to convert that to millimeters, the chart here to go from centimeters to meters tells us to multiply by 10. And again, from the previous slide, what I just taught you is if you're going to multiply 27 by 10, you can take your decimal place, which would be right after the 7 here, and you can move it right one place value, which is going to leave you with a blank place value there, which you can just put in a 0. All right. So it turns out 27 centimeters would equal 270 millimeters. Okay, so a few more examples here. Again, we start with millimeters. They want us to turn that into centimeters. So we're going to take our decimal here. We're going to move it to the left one place value. We're going to plunk it right in between those two zeros. And so that would turn 5,200 millimeters into 520 centimeters. 520. Ooh, forgive my messy writing here. This is actually like the most challenging part of online teaching is using a mouse to write numbers, all right? But anyways, there's your answer, 520 centimeters. And then the last question here is asking us to go from centimeters to millimeters again. So according to this chart, it means I have to multiply by 10. And if I'm multiplying by 10, it means I'm taking my decimal, which is actually before the 8 in this number. We're gonna move that to the right one decimal place. So that means we're gonna put it after the 8. So 0.8 centimeters would actually equal 8 millimeters. All right, so there's just 4 examples of how to convert between millimeters and centimeters. There's a little life hack that will help you just in moving the decimal to the left or to the right one place value. And if you head on over to Google Classroom, I've posted an assignment for you for today with just 20 little problems like this for you to practice. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We will see you back here tomorrow.